In the series of live broadcasts from the stages of Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. I'm Martin Buxpan. Tonight, the New York Philharmonic in a program of Dvorak and Schumann. Music director Kurt Masur conducts the orchestra, and cellist Yo-Yo Ma is the guest soloist. This concert is being broadcast live from Avery Fisher Hall. Now, backstage, here is our host, Hugh Downs.
Good evening, and welcome to Live from Lincoln Center. It's a cold, clear night on the Lincoln Center Plaza, a little after 8 o'clock, but backstage here, just the tension alone is keeping the place warm. Yo-Yo Ma is about to go on stage with Maestro Masur and face one of the great challenges of the cello repertoire, the Dvorak Cello Concerto. Very few pieces of music combine such extraordinary technical display with the symphonic depth that the Dvorak Concerto reaches. And there's probably nobody better suited to making the impossible sound inevitable than Yo-Yo Ma. This evening, after intermission, we're going to hear Kurt Masur and the New York Philharmonic in Robert Schumann's Rhenish Symphony. Schumann wrote this both from the heart and from the landscape. He was entranced by the beauty of the Rhine River, and yet he was tortured by his own struggle and frustration in finding happiness where people here devoted to the pursuit of pleasure. But first, there's a fascinating story about the Dvorak Cello Concerto, and we're fortunate that Mr. Ma played this concerto with Zubin Mehta in the New York Philharmonic some years ago, because this gives us the opportunity to tell you almost everything you should know about the Dvorak Cello Concerto.
A concerto supposedly is there to show off a soloist's ability to play an instrument. But actually, what makes this one of the great concertos, the solo instrument plays so many different roles in symphonic structure. You make something, for example, there's a run in the first movement. You go there. Now, this used inappropriately, although it's flashy, would sound just flashy. By combining a very difficult thing, a passage that gets to a moment of great arrival, you're combining everything together. So it's not show off, it's in fact elation.
In the beginning, we're listening a little bit like the way we do in a symphony for the thematic material, but we also know that even a bad composer has at least one great stroke in a concerto, and that's bringing in the solo instrument. Because everybody's sitting there, you got some famous soloists prepping up there, and no matter what's happening, no matter how beautiful the music is, no matter how absorbed, out of one part of your brain you think, when is the soloist going to come in? What's going to happen? What are they going to do? And that kind of dramatic jolt is one of the things that animates a concerto. So we get the strings, and then there's an enormous desire to be expressive. This really might have been Dvorak. That's his vocal range, that the cello is Dvorak speaking. And there are biographical elements in the concerto that lead us in that direction. Dvorak fell madly in love with Josefina Chermakova, who he was teaching, proposed to her, and she rejected him and married Count Kaunitz. And he eventually married her sister, Anna. But there is some evidence that he was really deeply, deeply in love with her, in some way, for his entire life.
I think it was a part of the strength of this music comes from kind of homesickness.
He came here a number of times for a couple of years, and he sometimes left children behind. He loved his house, he loved his home, he loved Bohemia.
When he was a young man, he wrote a group of songs called the Cypresses,
Which was Dvorak's sister-in-law, someone he loved very, very deeply. It was her favorite song.
After he finishes the concerto, with a brisk allegro to close, she dies.
He changed the whole ending of the last movement. And in the very last thing that he writes, like I would say maybe 40 seconds before the end, the cello plays with the solo violin, the concertmaster plays this theme.
The most haunting and beautiful reminiscence of this tune, which he'd written in 1865 for the beautiful young Josefina Chermakova.
In the manuscript, apparently he wrote, "For those that know me, they would understand. And for those that don't, it doesn't matter."
It's almost time for the concert to begin. Yo-Yo Ma and Kurt Masur are standing by here backstage, ready to walk out behind me to begin the Dvorak Concerto. At intermission, I'll be talking to Mr. Ma, and we'll take a look into the cello itself on a feature that we call This Old Cello. We'll also take a look at what romantic really meant to the composer Robert Schumann, who fought mental illness to a standstill in his Rhenish symphony. I see they are ready to begin, and I'll see you at intermission.
The Cello Concerto is one of three major works that Dvorak composed during the period of his residency in the United States. Between 1892 and 1895, he composed this Cello Concerto, the New World Symphony, and the F Major Quartet, the American Quartet. And now Yo-Yo Ma and Kurt Masur at the front of the stage, exchanging greetings with the players of the New York Philharmonic. And in just a few moments, Yo-Yo Ma will be the soloist with Kurt Masur and the New York Philharmonic in the Cello Concerto in B minor by Antonín Dvorak. Live from Lincoln Center, this has been the Dvorak Cello Concerto in B minor. Yo-Yo Ma, the soloist, with Kurt Masur and the New York Philharmonic. The performance coming to you from the stage of Avery Fisher Hall in Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. And Mr. Ma applauds the players of the New York Philharmonic. Dvorak's scoring calls for incidental solos from many of the principal players in the orchestra, and our cameras gave us some wonderful close-up shots of concertmaster Glenn Dicterow, principal flutist Gene Baxtresser, principal oboist Joseph Robinson, principal clarinetist Stanley Drucker, principal bassoon player Judith LeClaire, the principal horn Philip Myers, principal trumpet Philip Smith, principal trombone player Joseph Alessi, the timpanist Roland Koloff, and the principal bass Eugene Levinson. And there were some wonderful moments in the slow movement and again in the finale when Yo-Yo Ma exchanged glances and now shaking the hand of the principal cellist of the New York Philharmonic, Lorne Monroe. Not only did he exchange glances with Lorne Monroe during the performance, but great big smiles came over his face. And now, with music director of the New York Philharmonic, Kurt Masur. Interestingly, Dvorak was impelled to compose this concerto after attending a performance by the New York Philharmonic here in New York in the 1890s of the second cello concerto by Victor Herbert. And Yo-Yo Ma is playing that second Victor Herbert cello concerto with the New York Philharmonic on this stage this Saturday evening. Here he is returning for yet another bow and a handshake with concertmaster Glenn Dicterow. Yo-Yo Ma was born in Paris in 1955 of Chinese parents. He began studying the cello with his father at the age of 4. Later studies were here in New York with Janos Scholz, and in 1962 with Leonard Rose at the Juilliard School. In addition, Yo-Yo Ma is a graduate of Harvard College. And in 1991, in addition to his earned undergraduate degree, Yo-Yo Ma was awarded an honorary doctorate of music in 1991. He is also a distinguished teacher, spending the major portion of each summer at the Tanglewood Music Center, the summer home of the Boston Symphony, where he teaches and gives master classes. Joseph Robinson, the principal oboist of the New York Philharmonic. And between Mr. Masur and Yo-Yo Ma, the gentleman holding the violin is the principal of the second violin section, Mark Ginsberg. Live from Lincoln Center is presented and produced by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts Incorporated, one of the country's leading performing arts organizations. Lincoln Center Incorporated presents and produces more than 3,000 performances annually through such series as the Mostly Mozart Festival, Great Performers, Serious Fun, Jazz at Lincoln Center, and Lincoln Center Out of Doors, complementing the offerings of the other members of the Lincoln Center family, the various constituent performing arts organizations who together form the members of Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. And now it's intermission time, and let's again go backstage to our host, Hugh Downs, with Yo-Yo Ma.
I know. I have to tell you, Yo, that in addition to the incredible beauty of that concerto, it seems to push the technique of playing the cello right to the edge of impossibility. And is it as, it would be wrong to say that you make it look effortless. You don't. You just make it look and sound magnificent. There's a lot of work goes into that. Is it as hard as the score looks? And is it?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because behind every, I think, great concerto, a piece, there is someone behind there, besides the composer, that in some way helps it along. In this case, there was an Irish cellist, Victor Herbert, who actually played his concerto in April of 1894. And right after that, Dvorak started writing his concerto. He was a great cellist, and in fact, they were good friends. They taught together, and even as we speak now, 100 years ago to the day, Dvorak was writing this piece, finishing the last movement, scoring it in New York City.
Just a century ago today. My God. Now, Dvorak was not himself a cellist, as I understand it. How did he know what could be done with the cello? I'm asking a lot of these things for my own benefit, as you may guess.
Well,
but
I know
how do you
because
know you do things there that he might not have known could be done or couldn't be done?
Well, he actually was a very good violist. He played viola, he had friends who played, so he knew the instrument, but I think somehow this Victor Herbert actually helped, it just got him inspired, because afterwards, apparently Brahms, who was also a no-mean composer and a knower of good instrument writing, said to Dvorak when he saw this score, he says, "I didn't know the cello could do this."
Really?
Yeah.
So it did,
Isn't that
it
great?
did reach some, it
Yeah.
did approach some limits then, didn't
And
it?
speaking of which, I was wondering, you know, the last time we spoke, you told me you were going to write a piece because
I swear, I'm working
so
on it.
So you're working on it.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I'm here, right? So I'll be your cellist.
I'm going to be, I will need to lean on you.
And I thought maybe I would actually, you know, give you a little bribe and an incentive. You know, do you like this on the New York Philharmonic? I think this is for you with the New York Philharmonic on it. So just as a little inspiration.
I appreciate that. That
help
will,
the piece
that
go
will
along.
add some inspiration. Thank you. I have to ask, does it help to know about a composer like Dvorak? In this case, things like that he liked train schedules and who he was in love with. Is that a help in performing a work of this kind that meant a lot to him?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You want to be in the zone, and for me it helps a lot. I love to know things about, you know, how he went out, did all kinds of things. He went to Iowa. He actually, to know that he loved folk songs, he encouraged when he taught musicians to look in the music of their land and to find it and put it in the compositions. That helps. You think of home, hearth, campfires, the sky, love, beauty. To know that that's the kind of stuff that he worked with, his palette, I think that it helps the performance.
That is fantastic. In working a concerto also with a big orchestra, now do you ever feel outnumbered? There are 10 cellos in that orchestra and a lot of other instruments. Do you ever feel like there's a danger of not being heard or not being standing on?
That's the general cellist paranoia. You always think that you can't be heard. But once you get over that, it is such a thrill to work with people who also want to do the same thing, which I think is, I may be wrong, but I felt that everybody was with the music. From conductor, from the last stand, you know, string players,
came off
whatever.
that way, believe
Boy,
me.
I could feel everybody, and you know, you saw me looking out at Lauren Monroe, who, by the way, has 11 children. Can you believe it? And he is the first cellist of the Philharmonic, has been there for years and years. He was so into the music.
Yeah, I saw you watching.
And I was inspired looking at him and playing stuff with him.
Sure, that is marvelous. On the quality of the instrument, I want to ask you, is it better to have the very best? Does it make a difference? Let me ask you this way. If you had to perform the Dvorak Cello Concerto with a really cheap cigar box instrument, could you do it?
I think so. But the thing is, it helps when you have great equipment.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say instruments in a way, in a sense, is a piece of equipment.
Right.
It's also a great work of art, but I think you use it as something that helps you develop more colors and development, which is very interesting. But on a cigar box, you would try and find the colors anyway.
Right.
So
But
there's
there might
something
be-
beyond the instrument itself. There's something
sure.
beyond it. You know, it's the colors, the ideas, the thoughts, the feelings that you want to try to get to.
I often wonder if someone were starting out, or say you had a child or a grandchild that you felt had a shot at being a great cellist, should you try to equip him with the finest instrument you could get at that time, or would you wait until he was a little way along the line before you geared
That's
him
a
up?
very good question. I think there are, music has to do with beauty. And it doesn't mean you have to have the finest to have something that's beautiful. You know? I think you can have an instrument that may be not so costly, but if it's well made, if it sounds good, a kid who is naturally wants to hear a
Sure.
good sound will want to be drawn to that instrument.
I can see how that would be. If you got down so far that the instrument wouldn't hold tune or something, that kind of frustration would be a wet blanket.
That would not be so good.
That would not be good.
No.
Right. That's very interesting. Very good. Do you ever think, do different cellos lend themselves to different compositions? So you might switch from one cello to another because of what you're playing? Or?
Sure. Actually, I think sometimes this cello, the Montagnana, is, I think, a baritone instrument, has a deep, earthy voice. The Strad that I play sometimes has a tenor sound, which is incredibly refined and cultured. This, I love to play concertos with because you can really, you feel you can get, this instrument can draw the sound from the earth, you know, really from the stage.
Amazing.
The bass sound really kind of, it gets to you.
So they have that different character, even though the range of both instruments would be
It's
the same.
Right, that's right. It's like a tenor, you have such a gorgeous voice. Are you a tenor or a baritone?
Well, when I sang baritone.
You sang baritone. You feel that, you know?
Yeah.
A tenor would have the same,
Yeah.
different quality, but it would, you know, could be just as beautiful.
With a lot of overlap of
That's right.
range. Too.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that is true. What, in composers like this, when you bring so much to it, I have the feeling I get is that the composer, Dvorak, would have liked very much what we heard tonight.
Well, thank goodness he's not here to criticize it.
No, he isn't, but I really...
Suppose he hated it. So what would you do?
Unlikely, unlikely. Yo-Yo, thank you for this. It will be an inspiration.
Well, I
and,
hope, you know.
and I always enjoy talking with you, as usual. We have more now to go with in connection with the cello.
Terrific.
And I want to tell you that these fine instruments are among our finest antiques, and they're very seriously taken care of and cared for. I have some insight now to show you in the care and feeding of this old cello. Watch.
This cello, this Stradivarius, which I play on, I'm very lucky to play on it, I don't own. And the reason is, it's too expensive.
It would be difficult, I believe, to get 6 million for a cello. But I think we could get 5.
In fact, some people have bought it and are letting me use it for as long as I would like.
This particular instrument is in the 3 million bracket.
Strads have always been slightly more expensive than players can afford.
This one is 1714. I will show you a Guarnerius del Gesù, which is way over $4 million today.
Just the craftsmanship was so beautiful that it had a very high value from the very, very beginning. What is special about an instrument like the cello is that it's made out of living material. You know, you see, you know, the grain of the wood, spruce and maple, okay? The grain of the wood here goes, it's all instruments are made this way. This instrument is over 260 years old, 280 years old, I can't count. But, and it's under a lot of pressure. Much more highly strung than a tennis racket. In fact, what makes the instrument speak, you know, I put my bow across the string. This is under a lot of pressure. I'm not using much pressure, but it releases pressure. It makes this string vibrating, goes into here, goes to the, there's a little piece of wood that goes down there, that makes the back resonate, that mixes it up in the box, and it comes through the F-holes.
Virgil receives a cello as a gift.
He had no conception of the instrument. He was blowing into it.
And although he does not achieve greatness on the instrument, he is soon good enough to play in a local band. A jungle, however, is no place for a cellist, and Virgil soon learns the facts of life.
There's a whole profession involved in repairing and restoring the old instruments. It's quite different, really, than building a new instrument. These instruments are worth millions of dollars, and some of the repairs take many, many years to do properly. I'd be scared to death to take apart an old Stradivarius.
We could, if you want, you could do that.
Rene Morel is the surgeon for instruments. How much do you trust someone to open up your instrument? If I were to do it, I'd be scared to death. You know, what do? Take a chisel, whatever, you just kind of...
The cello was dropped, and you see here, we have a crack along the bass bar. There's no way you can repair this without taking the top off.
If you have to have an operation, if you believe in your doctor, well, Rene is your guy. He's an artist in the sense that he has a feel for what is right for a piece of wood.
Now, let's proceed here and see what happens. See, this is a part which is difficult. It was overly glued. Wood has a great strength, and yet it can break like a piece of glass. This size is good, like butter. This is the saddle. Now, this is the moment of truth. See, this already had some repair. This is a sound post patch. And the year is in here. This is the sound post. This is the soul of the cello. And this, it's not glue. It's only wedge with a slight forcing between this part of the back and this mark which is on the top. So if you look at it carefully, you will see that you have a tiny bit of a hole, an indentation there, with Jean-Baptiste Villon. He signed here, and you see this is 5 and 3, 1853. There is no secret in the making. Villon could duplicate Strat to the thousandth of an inch, but it never sounds like a Strat. If the violin responds to the feeling, to the heart of the human being who plays on it, this to him, it's his love, it's his life. If it is an instrument which has only the power, but he cannot sculpt, he cannot mold, cannot phrase, then he says, oh, it's a strong violin, but he won't fall in love with that.
Investing nationwide in programs.
On this Live from Lincoln Center telecast, the New York Philharmonic, Kurt Masur, and in the first half of the program, Yo-Yo Ma was soloist in the Dvorak B minor cello concerto. Now, let's once again go backstage to our host, Hugh Downs.
We tend to think of a romantic sentiment as not quite real. something like lovesick greeting cards or soap opera infatuations. But in Robert Schumann's day, the name romantic was anything but superficial. The Romantics were forging an artistic movement which was a driving force in Schumann's creative world. And it carried with it dark undercurrents, making it a perfect atmosphere for a manic depressive. To Schumann, romantic was real, a way of life. He suffered severe manic depression. He attempted suicide. And yet he gave us some of our most glorious music. You can't diagnose great music, but as Kurt Masur tells us, you might feel a restless energy in Schumann's music, a desperate desire to share his inspiration. And he wrote the Rhenish Symphony in perhaps his happiest time, while he was living on the magnificent Rhine River. But as you'll see, he may not have left his suffering far behind. Isn't it romantic?
Isn't it romantic? Music in the night, a dream that can be heard.
We tend to think of something romantic as kind of flowery with perhaps an excess of feeling. For Schumann, it was something else. It generally refers to heart over head, feeling over form. But we also use romantic to refer to that time in the 19th century when these beliefs seemed to take hold, where they influenced an enormous number of figures. Certainly for our sometimes caricature of the 19th century, the manic depressive fits perfectly because, you spew ideas out. The composer is no longer the craftsperson, the craftsman, but the creator, a new god, busts on the piano. You worship them. And that kind of creative fire was a sure sign of genius. Schumann, by contemporary definitions, seems to have had a fairly serious manic depressive illness.
It has such an inner vibration that you feel exactly that it wasn't enough for him to say it simple. He wants to make it more exciting.
Schumann, at the end, wrote and spoke about hearing choruses of angels, which would then terrifyingly change to choruses of devils. And in a way that's deeply moving and also profoundly paradoxical. It's almost as if some of the excesses of romanticism were being acted out in his diseased brain.
Instead of playing only the lines, the strings have to divide the notes. So instead of dim pam pam biddy, dim pam pam biddy, this is a kind of unrestful and not at least not such a singing sound. It's full of impatience, and it's a kind of no, I would say also desperation.
Well, what's really surprising is this leap. If one wanted to be cute, one of the things that they always say about, psychotic artists is that they always, if you give them a picture, they always go outside the frame. That kind of leap of more than an octave seems to go outside the boundaries that it's set for itself. And that's one of the things that some people try to associate with the idea of romantic.
We are too sophisticated in the neurotic illnesses. And I would say that at Schumann's time, he was so full of idealistic ideas. This was a man who was a dreamer until the end of his life. He dreamt that every human being is wonderful, is honest, is simple, is true. But the discovery of a disease normally doesn't help the patients.
One of the things that Romanticism did was to create a dichotomy between the past and the future. People like Schumann were obsessed with the future. On the other hand, there is this fascination and occasionally even obsession with the past. He wants to write an avant-garde shape, and yet the subject matter of it is something ancient, something exotic. This fourth movement was inspired by the elevation of the Archbishop at the Cologne Cathedral, and Schumann had witnessed that.
I think he was very impressed by, of course, by the building itself and by the kind of organ music, of holy music.
Preoccupation with the past and all the mysterious evocations to come out of the past were absolutely vital to him. So here we have a composer who's, again, brisk with romantic temperament, but also quite preoccupied with counterpoint as a representative of the past made present. Schumann clearly had a gift for being able to choose ideas which communicated such things with his audience. The part of the symphony which some people think was meant to depict the Rhine River
the so-called Rhinish symphony, the third symphony, is his last symphony. It comes from the Rhine River, and the Rhine River is throughout the whole river from beginning to the end. It's such a beauty, such a poetry. Those people liked to enjoy life, to live. I think in the third symphony, the so-called Rhinish symphony, we have just to face the fact that happiness cannot come from outside. Happiness is inside or it is not. And this weight upon his life and this weight upon his soul, you can say, somebody wants to be happy and can't. What means happiness, at least? If you have it inside, you are not disturbed by the outside. If you don't have it, you have to look for help from outside. And I think the Schumann Third Symphony is a symphony that somebody asked for help.
And with the intermission just about over here in Avery Fisher Hall, the musicians of the New York Philharmonic have returned to their places on stage for the performance in just a few moments of the Symphony No. 3 in E-flat, the Rhenish Symphony by Robert Schumann. Mr. Mazur said that Schumann is looking for help in this symphony. In my view, he finds it in the last movement, which is something rather joyous, an exclamation and outpouring of joy after a troubled first four movements. The Rhenish Symphony by Robert Schumann, Kurt Mazur, and the New York Philharmonic. Live from Lincoln Center, Kurt Masur has conducted the New York Philharmonic in the Symphony No. 3 in E-flat by Robert Schumann, the Rhenish Symphony. That number 3 is misleading. Actually, this work was the last of the 4 that Schumann composed. But because he reworked his first symphony and had that work published after this work, the first symphony became the 4th symphony. The order of composition of the Schumann symphonies is rather confusing, as is the case with a good many other composers. Here is Kurt Masur, recalled by the audience here at Avery Fisher Hall in New York City's Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. And Mr. Masur motions for several of the principal players of the orchestra to stand. There is the orchestra's principal horn, Philip Myers. Many horn solos in the symphony. And Joseph Robinson, the principal oboist, rather obscured behind the bass, and the principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, a man who has been in the orchestra for nearly 50 years, Stanley Drucker. The symphony was composed by Schumann in November and December of 1850, but already from 1833 onward, there were disturbing signs that Schumann's mental stability was sometimes questionable. Here once again is Kurt Masur. And outstretched arms call the musicians of the Philharmonic to their feet. As I said, from 1833 onward, the mental instability of Schumann became rather obvious. He was given to spells of irritability and moodiness, and then in 1854 came a total collapse. In a thoroughly irrational state, Schumann threw himself into the waters of the river Rhine. Rather ironic, since the symphony we've just heard was inspired in part by the river Rhine. And with a bow to the players of the New York Philharmonic, Kurt Masur now takes his leave of the stage here at Avery Fisher Hall. When Schumann threw himself into the Rhine, he was rescued by some boatmen and taken at his own request to an asylum at Endenich, which was near Bonn. He remained there in a state of acute melancholia. There were a few flashes of complete rationality, but then he died there in July of 1856. Until Schumann came upon the scene, the accepted aim of composers of symphonies was the creation of a musical entity in which a central idea informs all the movements and makes them seem inseparable parts of an integrated organism. Schumann expanded this idea so that literary and even pictorial elements found their place in his symphonies. The distinguished English musicologist Moscow Karner has written, "It is this very intrusion of poetic ideas that gives Schumann's symphonic work its special place. He opened to the symphony a world of romantic imagery and lyricism, which was at once new and personal." Well, our next Live from Lincoln Center telecast will be on the evening of Wednesday, March the 1st, here in Avery Fisher Hall, an evening with Kathleen Battle and Thomas Hampson. A program of gems from opera and Broadway. Kathleen Battle and Thomas Hampson will be joined by conductor John Nelson and the Orchestra of St. Luke's. The first half of the concert features operatic selections, including duets from Rossini's Barber of Seville and Mozart's Don Giovanni, along with arias by Massenet, Lehar, Korngold, and Handel. The second half will be devoted to great songs and duets of the American musical theater, including Irving Berlin's Old-Fashioned Wedding, Jerome Kern's All the Things You Are, and the Rodgers and Hammerstein soliloquy from Carousel. This has been another in our continuing series of Live from Lincoln Center telecasts inaugurating, actually this evening, its 19th season. The first telecast, a New York Philharmonic concert from what was then called Philharmonic Hall. The New York Philharmonic was conducted on that occasion by Andre Previn, and the soloist was pianist Van Cliburn in a performance of the Grieg Piano Concerto. And the major work that the Philharmonic played then, under Mr. Previn's direction, was Richard Strauss's Ein Heldenleben. So, 19 years ago, almost to the day, that first Live from Lincoln Center was on January 31st, 1976. And so we come to the end of this Live from Lincoln Center telecast. The New York Philharmonic, Kurt Masur, music director, Yo-Yo Ma played the Dvorak B minor cello concerto in the first half. This is Martin Buxban. Good evening.